discovering the truth behind the forgotten graveyard. This gate's been locked for decades. Behind it lie the stories of hundreds of people that time, and all of us have forgotten. Well, today, we're changing that. We're stepping inside to uncover the heartbreaking hidden histories of the people buried here. From enslaved individuals to families completely devastated by disease. And we're going to give them a voice again. The weeds are literally waist-high. The few stones still standing are putting up a good fight, but they're covered in a century of lichen and grime, their carvings almost worn smooth by the wind and rain. For every rural burial ground like this one that we know about, there are at least 5 more that have vanished from our collective memory. This isn't just neglect. It's an outdoor museum where the exhibits have been left to decay, a library where the books have been allowed to turn to dust. So why does this happen? Sometimes it's simple things like financial hardship or families just moving away. But other times, the reasons are much darker. Segregation, urban development, or even a deliberate effort to erase an entire community from the map. But the worst damage of all, simply being forgotten. There's an old saying, you die twice. Once when you take your final breath, and a second time when someone says your name for the last time. Our mission today is to make sure that second death never happens to the people here. Section 1. The Children of the Epidemic. As we push deeper into the grounds, the chaos of nature starts to give way to a kind of sorrowful order. Right here, in this small clearing, is a cluster of graves. And they're small, heartbreakingly small. On old tombstones, a lamb often represents a child, and I can just make out the faint shape of one on this little stone. Let's get closer and see if we can make out the inscription. Annabelle Cutter, died August 12, 1849. Aged 4 years, 2 months, 7 days. And right next to her, Thomas Cutter, died August 18, 1849. Aged 6 years, 11 months. And there's another one, a third small stone almost completely swallowed by the earth. This is the footprint of a 19th century epidemic. Before modern medicine, diseases like cholera, diphtheria, and tuberculosis would just rip through communities. In 1849, a massive cholera outbreak hammered this region, and with no sanitation or clean water, it spread like wildfire. Losing one child is a tragedy that's impossible to imagine. But to lose 2, maybe more, in a single week, that's a level of grief I don't think any of us can comprehend. These stones aren't just markers of death, they're expressions of love from a family that was shattered by an enemy they couldn't even see. They mark a time when a staggering 25% of all deaths were children under the age of 5. The precise ages carved here, down to the day, show you just how desperately this family wanted to hold on to every single moment of a life cut so terribly short. And their story, this story of profound loss, was almost completely wiped out by time. Section 2. The Unmarked Grave and the Recovered Story. Now look over here. Away from the more ornate family plots, the landscape changes. There are fewer headstones, and the ones that are here are simple, rough field stones. No names, no dates. This was almost certainly the burial ground for the enslaved people who worked the very land that surrounds this cemetery. For centuries, their resting places were intentionally left undocumented, their lives considered unworthy of remembering. But a grave isn't something a city or a history book should be allowed to forget, especially when the person in it was already forgotten while they were alive. Thanks to the tireless work of local historians and preservationists, we're finally starting to piece these stories back together. They dig through old funeral home ledgers, family Bibles, and census data, trying to connect a name to each of these unmarked stones. And one of those names is Cyrus Jackson. Records tell us he was born into slavery around 1830. He wasn't buried with a carved headstone, but thankfully, oral histories passed down through generations in the local black community kept his memory alive. After emancipation, he became a tenant farmer, working the same land where he was once enslaved. Census records show him living here with his wife, Sarah, and their 5 children. His story is one of unbelievable resilience, of surviving one of history's greatest injustices and somehow building a life and a family in its wake. Finding a grave like this, even if it's just a simple stone, and connecting it back to a name, a life, a family, that is an act of restoration. It restores the dignity that was denied to Cyrus in his life and in his death. Cemeteries like this are filled with thousands of these stories, stories of both enslaved people and free African Americans, whose contributions and very existence were systematically erased. Uncovering them isn't just about history. It's about justice. Bringing a story like Cyrus Jackson's back from the brink takes a ton of work. It's a mix of gritty historical research, community outreach, and sometimes even high-tech tools like ground-penetrating radar. This work is so incredibly important. If you believe these stories have to be told and that these sacred grounds deserve protection, then consider subscribing to the channel. When you join us, you're not just watching videos. You're helping to preserve the legacies of people who were almost lost forever. Section 3. A community's forgotten pillars. It wasn't just children or the enslaved who were forgotten here. This place tells the story of an entire community. As we walk, you can see the different sections, different types of stones, that tell of changing fortunes and social classes. Wait a minute. Over here. Look at this. This marker is almost completely toppled, but if you look closely at the symbol carved into it, that's the insignia of a Civil War veteran. Think about that. This man survived one of the most brutal conflicts in history, came home, and lived out his life, only for his final resting place to be lost to a tangle of weeds. How many other community pioneers are buried here? Founders, craftsmen, leaders whose names were once on everyone's lips but are now known only to the roots and the soil. These headstones are bookmarks in our history, each one holding the place of a life, a story. They're tangible links to the people who built the world we live in, and by saving their graves, we save their stories. This isn't just a collection of graves, it's a cross-section of a society with all its triumphs, tragedies, and inequalities laid bare. Section 4. Why this matters. So, why do this? Why spend hours in a place like this fighting back thorns and squinting at faded text? Because these aren't just names on rocks. They are real, invaluable perspectives on our own past. Saving cemeteries is saving history itself, a diverse, creative, and intensely personal history. When we lose these graves, we lose the messy human details, and we end up sanitizing our own story. The process of reclaiming this history is transformative. It brings together descendants who are connecting with their ancestors for the very first time. It involves archaeologists carefully unearthing artifacts, and community volunteers just showing up with shovels and work gloves to clear the brush. It's a collective effort to build a bridge to our past. But more than that, it's about our future. By caring for the memory of our communities, maybe we can understand our past in new ways and build a more just future. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about segregation, poverty, and neglect, and ensures that those injustices aren't forgotten. All across the country, black cemeteries have been paved over for swimming pools, office buildings, and highways. A final, brutal act of erasure. The work of finding and preserving these sites is an act of defiance against that. We walked through a gate today that had been shut for generations, and we gave a voice to those who have been silent for far too long. We found the family of Annabelle and Thomas Cutter, torn apart by an epidemic. We found the resting place of Cyrus Jackson, a man who endured slavery to build a life of resilience. And we found the faded markings of the forgotten veterans and pioneers who laid the groundwork for all that followed. These grounds aren't just repositories of the dead. They are libraries of life, filled with stories that make up the rich, complicated tapestry of our shared history. Leaving this place, the silence feels different. It's not the silence of neglect anymore. It's a silence filled with respect, with remembrance. There's an old idea that being dead isn't so bad, but being forgotten is a tragedy. Today we made sure these people will be remembered. What about your community? Are there forgotten graveyards or lost stories in your town? Let me know in the comments. Sharing these histories is the first step in making sure they're never truly lost.